It's Monday, it's 12:15. It's a new parliamentary term. We're back and we're live in Westminster. With me today, Conservative Vice Chair Andrew Bowie, Shadow Policing Minister Sarah Jones, former government advisor Anita Boateng and Tony Blair's former Director of Communications, Alistair Campbell. Today,
we can do all these things without raising our income tax, VAT or national insurance contributions. That's our guarantee.
Is Boris Johnson about to break that election promise to pay for his social care plans? Also today, supply issues and labour shortages. Employers say they could last for up to 2 years unless the government takes more action. So what, if anything, should the government do?
Our values are still those which free people choose.
Tony Blair says the West should still be ready to intervene in foreign wars. But is that era now over? And Extinction Rebellion say their latest protests have been incredibly successful. Have they? So, MPs are back in Westminster. We have two of them here in the studio. It is the first day for the new term of Parliament. The domestic political agenda is packed. So, after 18 months of focus on the COVID pandemic in the main, does it look, Alistair and Anita, Alistair first, does it look as if politics is returning to normal?
I don't find anything normal about our politics at all, I'm afraid. I don't think it's normal that we're still in the COVID crisis and Sajid Javid hasn't done a briefing for the 2 months he's been there. I don't think it's normal that Parliament and the Speaker appears to be more worried about whether you wear chinos than whether the Prime Minister tells the truth. And I don't think it's normal that we've got this new code word for get Brexit done, which is supply chain issues. So I think there's an awful lot about our politics at the moment that is very, very abnormal. And my worry is that we're normalising the abnormal.
Right, well, it does make sense, just about. We're going to talk about some of the issues you've raised. Anita, what about you? Do you think the domestic issues that we are going to talk about today and for the rest of this week certainly is an indication of politics returning to normal?
Yes, I think it is, and it may shock you that I don't agree with Alistair's doom and gloom analysis of the challenges that the government faces. But the example of one of the things we're probably going to talk about today, like social care, is something where the government is grasping a big fundamental challenge that has plagued this country for decades. And I think that's a sign of the government really tackling some of these big issues in addition to dealing with COVID.
Right. Sarah, a slightly different question. Do you think the pandemic, which is ongoing to some extent, has changed politics for good?
Well, I think Andrew and I both came in 2017, and there's been no normal in that time at all, because we had the whole Brexit situation, and now we've had COVID. And Alistair's point's a really important one, which COVID hasn't gone away. There are hundreds of people being hospitalised every day still in our country with COVID, and we need to deal with that. I think what COVID has done, apart from anything else, is expose a lot of the inequalities in the system that were there before that we need to tackle. So social care, the NHS, income, jobs, there's a whole raft of issues that have been there and rising for 10 years that COVID has shone a light on, and we need to begin to tackle.
What about you, Andrew?
Well, like Sarah, I came in 2017. I'd love to know what normal actually is. Having dealt with Brexit, we were straight into the awful crisis that was the global pandemic and dealing with that. And Sarah's absolutely right. There are still hundreds of people being hospitalised by this virus every single day. And so we can't take our eye off the ball. But it is only right and proper that the government deals with some of the big picture issues that we are grappling with as a country. And that, I am very glad to see, is what's going to be dominating the agenda over the next couple of weeks.
All right, well, that's what we're going to look at now, and that is the issue of reform of social care, a pledge made by Boris Johnson in the election, or just after it, I should say. Let's have a look at the front pages, some of them. Very clear where they stand. The Daily Telegraph, Tory party grandees join tax rise revolt. This is about the plans to increase national insurance as they see it. We can move on to the Mail. Cabinet revolt on £10 billion tax raid. The Times headline has this: Prime Minister to defy rebels over tax rise for social care. And The Guardian: the Prime Minister faces mutiny over plan to raise taxes for social care. Laura Kuenssberg, the BBC's political editor, is with us now. Laura, people may be watching and listening to this pretty vocal backlash from Tory MPs, amongst others, for plans to pay for social reform that haven't yet been announced and haven't really been completely signed off. So what's going on?
That's right, Jo. Well, we are in a bit of a strange vacuum, and in a way we're picking up exactly where we left off. Our viewers might remember at the end of July there was a big hullabaloo about whether or not the government was ready finally to announce how they planned to solve some of the real problems in our creaking system of social care in England. And they couldn't quite get there at that point because there were all sorts of haggling and all sorts of fights about how to do it. We pick up, therefore, where we left off, again with lots of Conservatives, including cabinet ministers, really worried about what they've been reading and hearing. One Tory minister even said to me, this is not the right way to go about it, and it is not the right thing to do. But it does seem that Downing Street tomorrow is all set to press ahead, with Boris Johnson saying that they plan to increase national insurance, probably at around 1.25%, to pay for a long-term funding deal for the NHS and money towards the social care system, with some reforms attached. But I think the last 48 hours have shown, Number 10, that it's going to be pretty bumpy trying to get this through, because Boris Johnson is planning to break one promise, saying that he would not increase taxes, in order to keep the other, trying to fix social care.
Right. I mean, it's probably worth reminding ourselves 10 years ago, so Andrew Dilnot was commissioned by the coalition government to look at how to protect the public from the risk of sky-high care bills if they needed care for a long time. Now, those proposals for a cap on costs have been in place for years, but not enacted. So,
well, they have. That's right. And Sir Andrew Dilnot, well-respected academic and thinker, came up with this idea where essentially the government, the taxpayers, would club together to put a cap on the amount that anyone could be expected to pay if they are unlucky enough to find themselves in the situation where they or a family member needs really, really intensive care. Those proposals were, you know, radical, seen by some at the time. They went through the parliamentary process. They actually ended up on the statute book. The Care Act, I think from 2014, does actually exist. But the coalition backed away from it when they thought and worried about what the price tag would be. Now, that's one reason, I think, why this government is actually reaching for that structure, because the legislation is already there. It's already happened. It's already been through Parliament. And technically, they don't actually need a vote to make the reforms happen. They would, of course, have to have a vote on increasing national insurance. But I have heard a couple of interesting things this morning, that the government might actually push to have a vote on this new levy that's to go towards health costs and the cost of social care, perhaps to try to get some of those grumpy backbenchers on board and to show to the country, which Boris Johnson is very keen to do, whatever you think of him, that this was a difficult problem and he does actually intend to keep his promise to fix it, however controversial and however much unhappiness there's going to be about these proposed reforms. And there will be a lot, most notably because national insurance is, of course, paid by people who work. And rather than being paid by wealthy pensioners or other people who've accrued property, whose the value of their house has gone up on unearned income. And that's one of the central criticisms of this idea, is that national insurance raise won't just break a promise, but it would hit people who can least afford it, protecting wealthy pensioners at the top. But one final thing, it also looks like the Chancellor is also going to rip up the triple lock, which was meant to protect the incomes of pensioners. So it may well be that the government tries to present this as pensioners are going to lose out a little bit because of the triple lock changes, and people of working age will lose out. And that way, they'll try to present this as something that is fairer than just an NI rise on its own.
Laura Kuenssberg, thank you very much. Well, Andrew, let's start then with national insurance. Are you comfortable with an increase in national insurance to pay for reform to social care?
OK, well, two things. Firstly, Laura is incredibly well informed, of course, but right now this is all speculation. There has been no announcement from Number 10 or the Treasury.
She has also just said she is pretty sure that that is what's going to be announced, and even has a figure of 1.25%. It's been in all the papers for the last few days, never mind the last few weeks. I'm not asking you to say, is it going to happen? What I'm saying is, if it is announced, are you comfortable with a rise in national insurance, in principle, to pay for reform to social care?
Well, as I say, this is all speculation at this stage. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor will come forward in due course and announce their plans. But this is a very serious issue, and the British people expect us to grapple with the serious issues of our time.
Yeah,
and the pressures on the social care system.
Should it be with an increase in national insurance? That's all I'm asking.
Well, this is exactly what they're debating, I'm sure, in Downing Street and in the Treasury right now, how to pay for the steps that we must take to protect our social care system.
I understand that, but people know you have an opinion, Andrew, and people know you will have thought about this. And the point is, are you comfortable with the principle of a tax burden increasing on working-age people, just broadly, to pay for anything in that sense? But let's talk about social care.
Well, I'm very comfortable with the fact that this government, under this Prime Minister, are taking the difficult choices to arrest the pressures that we have on the social care system in this country.
By taxing working-age people more.
So that people know when they are in need, they will have the social care that they deserve. That's what this government is committed to delivering, and that's what they will deliver.
Right, so you don't have a view on whether it should be national insurance or anything else?
Well, we'll see what the announcement is when it comes.
Right, and then you'll defend it, even though at the moment you can't have come up with an idea on how you feel about it.
It's all speculation right now. Who knows what the plan's going to be? But I do know that we're coming forward with the plan and that the British people expect that.
Right. I mean, Sarah, Labour don't support the idea of a rise in national insurance because they've already said so, even though we haven't actually heard the plans being announced. So which income tax or any other tax would you support to pay for it?
So we've said national insurance is not the way to do it because, as Laura says, there are concerns about it being unfair, both intergenerationally and in terms of the burden being on the low paid. And I think a lot of Conservatives, if you look at the media, agree with that. You need a system that's fair. Now, there are lots of proposals out there, both from Andrew Dilnot years ago, from the Health Select Committee a couple of years ago, people like David Willits on the radio this morning making sensible suggestions, the TUC making sensible suggestions. But look, what I would say to the government is you've got to be really careful to announce a tax rise before you've persuaded the country what that's for. So the plan has to be, what are we going to do about the massive shortage in our workforce? What are we going to do about the shortfall in funding for those who can't afford to pay? What are we going to do about the cap? And what I would also say is you've got to be super careful announcing a tax rise when you're not spending money wisely that we already have. And so we have huge inefficiencies in the system where we have people ending up in hospital or on care homes when they could be at home. It wastes millions. We're using agency staff because we can't recruit. Wastes millions.
We'll talk about the labour shortages.
Spend the money wisely.
Right, but let's return to this idea because it would be a massive break, obviously, with the manifesto. Anita, what's your view about increasing national insurance to pay for social care reform?
Well, Jo, you said Andrew didn't answer the question. I'm still waiting to hear from Sarah about what Labour is going to do.
But they're not the government. They're not the government, Anita. So let's hear about your view on this principle, because it has been an argument raging over the weekend amongst Tories.
Well, they're the opposition who want to be a government in waiting, so I would argue they should have an opinion and know what they would do. On the broader question, I think that absolutely, this is a big structural challenge where everyone can't win. And when you talk about the exacerbation of growing social care costs and ageing population, tax structure that is typically focused on income, not wealth, these are all things that the government is grappling with as it seeks a solution. I sort of think national insurance versus income tax, it's sort of, there's not a lot in there in terms of hitting the working age population. I think it's right the government is thinking in this direction. I think the detail really does matter as to whether or not it's something that we can all get behind.
All right. Well, Anita, you've come a bit closer to saying that perhaps national insurance increases could be used. Alistair, what about you? Yes or no? Is it the right way to pay for social care reform?
I don't think it is. And I mean, I understand why both Andrew and Sarah are reluctant to commit themselves at this stage. But I think what you've seen there is the kind of problem that Boris Johnson is going to get himself into. As with Brexit, as with his haphazard approach to Afghanistan, he tends to sort of, make it up as he goes along and do stuff at the last minute. This is the guy who said he had the plan. He had a plan for social care. As Sarah said, there is no plan, but there is now the proposal for a tax rise, which they're going to try and make more palatable by saying it's also partly about rescuing the health service. Now, first of all, the health service, people working in the health service will argue that this is not going to be enough. And on social care, I actually don't think there is a worse tax to impose to pay for social care. I know this will amaze you, Jo, but I'm 2 years off pensionable age. And
Surely
if I get I am. If I get to 66, then I pay nothing into this.
Absolutely.
And yet somebody who's down at, probably earning less than I'll be earning then, say in the 25,000 bracket, who's a younger person who may be dealing with student debt and maybe having to pay more because of the loss of universal credit, whatever it might be, there are people at that end of the income stream who are going to have to pay for this. And I think that is grossly unfair between the generations and between the different sectors.
So what would be fair? What would be a fair way to raise the money? Because as you know, because you were around when this was first being discussed, way back 20 years ago, and there hasn't been a solution to this problem. So in a way, is Andrew right that at least the government looks as if it is going to grip it, if I can use that word, in one way or another?
As long as it does. And I think we do have to look at dividend tax. We do have to look at capital gains tax. We have to look, we've seen this during COVID. Sarah mentioned that the COVID epidemic has exposed massive inequalities, and it's addressing those inequalities. And I think to fund the sort of social care system we're going to need, we should be looking at those who are at the other end of the income scale, not where the government appeared to be looking. So,
all right.
Capital gains and dividend tax would be my starter for 10.
Right, and is that your starter for 10, Sarah?
Well, I think we need to have the plan first, and then we need to look at all these different taxation systems.
But would you favour capital gains tax over national insurance?
We need to look at what the proposals come from government, and then we will take a view. But we're clear that national insurance is not, for the very reasons that Alistair has just set out, is not the way to do it. Whatever the system is, it needs to actually be it needs to be value for money, and it needs to be fair, so that those with the highest incomes are paying more than those.
So like a wealth tax, which your colleague suggested.
That's a very interesting, a suggestion that we know people have been talking about over the weekend. David Willits was suggesting some interesting things this morning. There are lots of proposals out there, but first we need a plan, and we need to make sure we're spending taxpayers' money wisely, which at the moment we're not in the social care system.
Let's talk about the fairness issue, Andrew. Do you accept what Alistair has said about the fact that it will be working-age people, not people like him in a couple of years, who will be of retirement age and won't be paying national insurance? I mean, in the Conservative manifesto of 2019, it said clearly, we want to make sure that you get to keep more of the money you earn and that we keep your bills low. We will help people and families throughout their lives by bringing down the cost of living and making sure that work always pays. You made a particular appeal to working people that looks as if it's going to be broken.
Absolutely not. We are still committed very much to those values. The Conservative Party is very much built on those values.
But do you accept that if you increase national insurance, it won't be?
Look, the people out there in the country, I'm sure, understand and respect the fact that, as you just said, this is an issue that every government of this country has been grappling with for over 20 years. This government has decided to grip it. This government has decided to take the difficult issues, including how we arrest the problems in social care, how we pay for it, get to grips with it and move on. And that's exactly what we are doing. And we'll find out this week what the plan is. I mean, Sarah can't say what the Labour plan is and quite rightly isn't willing to comment until she sees it.
Although Boris Johnson, as Alistair Campbell said he had a plan. He had a plan a few years ago, and it looks as if it's still being put together and finally being signed off when we hear about it this week.
Well, we will hear about it this week. I look forward to hearing about it this week, and I think the British people will as well.
Is there a problem, Anita, with what looks like breaking the manifesto? I mean, it was very clear, the signed pledge by Boris Johnson in 2019. We will not raise the rate of income tax, VAT or national insurance.
I think it's going to make the journey through the Commons or winning broad-based support amongst Conservatives challenging. But I think governments are elected to solve problems. And it does feel to me as though the government is looking quite seriously at all of the levers that it could possibly pull, because I think, almost to address Alice's point, you need a broad base of tax to be able to deal with something as expensive and as difficult as this.
All right. Just before we move on, Alistair, do you think after all the years of trying to find a political solution that it will be welcomed, as a poll recently shows the majority would support a rise in national insurance to pay for it?
My experience of opinion polls on taxation is that people are very, very willing to say in opinion polls that they support a rise in tax, but when it starts to eat into their pockets, they're less keen. And don't forget, I mentioned universal credit. This is going to be the single biggest benefit cut that we've had in our history overnight in October. So you're talking about people's living standards already facing a huge challenge at a time of real pressure on standards of living. So that's why I do think we have to look at people who earn a lot more.
All right, well, let's talk about a different issue that has been raised, though, in that discussion on social care. In the Financial Times, the article is UK faces 2 years of labour shortages. According to the Confederation of British Industry, officials have told businesses they should use British workers rather than expect rules to change. What do you put it down to, the shortage?
Well, there are many reasons for the shortage in workers in the country that we're seeing right now, not least the coronavirus pandemic, not least because people have been retiring, and because, for example, in the HGV driver sector, there has been no testing going on for a large proportion of the year and a half that we were locked down, and so there's no young drivers coming in to sort of fill the gap left by people who are retired. But I mean, Alistair's going to come. I can predict what Alistair's going to tell us.
Say the B word.
Alice is going to tell us it's all because of Brexit. But if it's all because of Brexit, why are there shortages in France and Italy and Poland and the United States of America? They haven't left the European Union. The United States wasn't even in the European Union, and they're still facing labour shortages. The government understands there's an issue. We're taking action to address that issue, and we're going to be working with business and industry very closely to make sure that we come up with the solutions necessary to make sure we don't continue to have labour shortage. But it's not because of Brexit.
Oh, Alistair.
Well, it is not 100% because of Brexit, but it is to a large extent because of Brexit. And also, this idea, I've just had a holiday in France. I didn't see any empty supermarket shelves there. I didn't meet any unemployed lorry drivers. They do not have the same issues, and that is all part of the gaslighting. That is the one thing this government is good at. And I just wish, he was talking a minute ago, Andrew and Anita were both talking about the need to sort of address problems as they are. Can we please get in the real world and at least accept that many of the difficult challenges we are facing at the moment are in part, and in this case in large part, related to the unforeseen by him consequences of Brexit. At least we can then start to have an honest debate. But while we're living in this complete la-la land, where these empty shelves and the pigs that we're about to destroy, this government that promised greater standards for animal welfare, and the problems that we're seeing at Nando's and KFC and the Co-op, that they have nothing to do with Brexit and HGV drivers going back to the European Union, is complete fantasy. So get in the real world and have a real discussion about it.
Get in the real world, Andrew.
But look, a lot of I don't deny that a lot of the workers that we had in this country who were in these sectors and in these industries have gone back to their home countries in Europe. But a lot of that is to do with the fact that when we went into lockdown in March 2020, a lot of people took the opportunity to decide to stay at home in the country of their origin rather than locked down in this country miles away from their family and friends. Also, the huge success of the Eastern European economies drawing people back into those countries, which is something we should welcome, meaning that people can get well-paid, rewarded jobs in those countries, and so are choosing to stay and support the economies and where their families are in Eastern Europe, which is where we drew a lot of people in these sectors from before. That is the reason that we are facing shortages right now.
Right. What's a new one on you, Alistair?
Well, apparently now it's all about the wonderful success of the Eastern European economies. I mean, honestly, Andrew, you're not going to be able to resolve this problem. You're looking at the possibility, not just the CBI, but you look at the Food and Drink authorities and what they're saying. You look at some of the big supermarkets and what they're saying. And you're heading into winter, you're heading towards Christmas. You're only going to be able to grip this if you actually do at least acknowledge you're going to have to start to talk to other leaders.
I mean, Alistair, we do acknowledge there's an issue, hence 13,000 work coaches, hence the lifetime skills guarantee, hence the everything else we are doing to encourage people and get people back into work in this country. But to say that this is because of Brexit is simply untrue.
The lorry drivers.
Hang on, Alistair. I'm going to get Sarah Nita in.
Well, look, we've got food prices rising. We've got a massive shortage of different types of food. My shop this weekend, no skim milk, no white bread, no peas. We know this is a very real problem, and we know that it is going to get worse before it gets better. So the point is, what's the government going to do about it? We have said, set up a system where you have a minister who is in charge of banging heads together to fix this. Set up a task force, so sector by sector you go through. So Andrew says HGV drivers haven't been able to take their tests during COVID. Well, let's speed up that testing system so that they can. We need to look at migration. We need to go to the Migration Advisory Committee and say, look, HGV drivers, we've got a massive shortage. What are we going to do about it? We need to negotiate with the EU so we have a better system. Everybody's saying 1st of October when the system changes, that's going to be a problem. This government always wait for a problem to become a crisis before they tackle it, and it really needs tackling and gripping now, because businesses are, 40% of businesses who import say they have got increased administration, which is putting them off being able to go about their business and do what they need to do. We are going to have a Christmas where we don't have enough food to celebrate with our families if they don't take action now.
Oh, Anita.
Well, I feel like I'm the person on the panel with the longest memory here, certainly when I look at Alistair and Sarah. This is a problem that has been going on for decades. Business rightly worries about skill shortages. It naturally looks overseas to fill gaps. The government is concerned about the impact on wages, and it wants to build skills in the UK to tackle the problem, which takes time. This is not a unique problem, either to the UK, to Andrew's point, or in fact to this moment in time. I think COVID has exacerbated that. But actually some of the challenges we're talking about, but it's very easy to make this a Brexit story when you don't have to engage with some of the reasons.
Back for 20 years. I don't remember the empty shelves. That's all I'm saying. So
what I'm saying is the reason why we're structurally not seeing, let me finish, the reason why we're not seeing, for instance, the number of lorry drivers that we need is because the work is grueling, it's unpredictable hours, there are huge changes in shift patterns and falling wages as a result of supermarket margins. These things are not about Brexit. It's all about how do we invest in ensuring that we can skill our population, do practical things around ensuring that the lorry driver qualifications can come through, but ultimately we make these jobs more attractive for British workers.
On that,
and that is a problem we cannot solve easily.
Well, on that issue that Anita's just raised, Sarah, wages are going up, particularly in certain sectors, like for lorry driving. Is that something you welcome?
Well, I mean, it's a challenge, isn't it? Because I was in a care home.
Well, is it a good thing that wages go up?
They were saying that people are leaving the care sector because they can earn more in supermarkets. But look, what we need is a plan. The ministers need to come together with the sector. We need to get business and trade unions sitting around a table to go, what are we going to do about making these jobs more attractive? Because longer hours is definitely not the solution. How can we mitigate in the short term by doing things like speeding up those licences for HGV drivers? What can we do with the Migration Advisory Committee to in the short term, because there is such a chronic shortage? But the point is, this is a problem that we saw coming, that business warned about. They are now saying it's going to get worse, and we need a proper plan from government to fix it across the board.
Right, in terms of that proper plan, would you welcome, Andrew, relaxing some of the entry requirements for certain foreign workers who have skills that we need?
Yes, absolutely. And I know that the government are looking very much at the list of skilled jobs all the time and reviewing it. And I would welcome any changes that were seen as necessary to do that. But to answer the point you raised, Sarah,
you would like it?
Yes, I would welcome that.
For a couple of years, for 5 years, for
however long it's necessary. But I firstly would like to answer the point. Of course, it's a good thing that HGV drivers are getting paid more for the skilled work that they do. That has to be a good thing. We have to welcome that. But this is going to take a while to sort out in its entirety. The government is working very closely to reduce the time it takes to get your licence to drive an HGV, and it's working to encourage more British people into these jobs, these essential jobs here in the UK, so we don't have to see the empty shelves that everybody's been talking about so far today.
You're shaking your head?
Why is the CBI, why are businesses crying out and saying, IKEA saying we can't get parts, car manufacturing firms saying they can't get the parts, our farming industry saying we're going to have to kill livestock because we haven't got the staff. Clearly, and the CBI said this, you cannot leave this problem to get better on its own. It needs more intervention
and the
from
government isn't, and the government is speaking to business and industry as we speak to take radical action to make sure that we actually address this issue.
All right, let's talk about Afghanistan. Of course, it has been the dominant story of the summer, unsurprisingly, and the fallout from the withdrawal continues. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson is making a statement in the Commons later this afternoon. Meanwhile, the former Prime Minister Tony Blair, Alistair Campbell's former boss, delivered a speech at Rusi this morning on Afghanistan. Let's just hear a little bit of it.
Now, maybe my generation of leaders were naive in thinking countries could be remade, or maybe the remaking needed to last longer. But we should never forget, as we see the women of Afghanistan in the media, culture and civic society now flee in fear of their lives, that our values are still those which free people choose. Recovering confidence in those values and in their universal application is a necessary part of ensuring we stand up for them and are prepared to defend them.
Well, Alistair, Tony Blair still very firmly championing that doctrine of Western interventionism. Or is it over, that era?
Well, I think it's, look, what's happened in recent days, I think, has taken an awful lot of people by surprise, because what you've seen is Joe Biden elected very much, I think, on the message globally. The reason why his election was welcomed so widely around the world, because America is back rather than America first. And what we've seen really is Joe Biden saying it's America first still. And I think that does pose massive strategic challenges for the UK, for the rest of Europe, and for some, if you like, the second order and third order powers. And, you know, I think what Tony was saying, I've read Tony's speech, and I don't think he's not sort of saying, you know, let's just go in gung-ho here, there and everywhere. What he is saying is that we've sent a very, very dangerous signal to the rest of the world about our ability to commit to the long term, about our ability to understand the way that the geostrategic world is changing and how we risk, frankly, being weakened by what's happened. So I think that there's been a lot of debate about Afghanistan, about getting the Brits out, about getting those who helped to get us out, and that's incredibly important. But I do think that the geostrategic changes and some of the security challenges we now face, I don't believe that they're being addressed in the way that they should be by Parliament, by the government, and that's the debate we've got to go to now.
Right, Andrew, do you agree a dangerous signal has been sent by the withdrawal to the rest of the world?
Yes, I do, actually. I think what we saw a few weeks ago in Afghanistan was gut-wrenching. You know, and you know, our hearts go out to those incredibly brave women that we saw a few days ago protesting on the streets of Kabul, knowing that the Taliban are now in power there. And I think we were all disappointed by the way that the Americans executed their withdrawal. I think we have an obligation to those people that supported our mission over the past 20 years in Afghanistan. And I agree with Tony Blair that the values still remain, and that this world is a better place for countries like the United States of America and the United Kingdom standing up for those values across the world. But of course, how we go about championing those values is the big question. And we do need to address it, because America is not in the same place as it was 20 years ago. And yes.
So does the UK government not have a role with this? Without the US, we can't defend the values that you've just said.
Of course it has a role. As the second power in NATO, as a member of the Commonwealth, as a member of the UN Security Council, we have exerted our influence in many, many positive ways over the past few weeks. And let's not forget, we got 16,000 Afghans actually out of the country over the past week.
But many more, the government has said itself, are still there.
Absolutely.
What do you take away at this point, Anita?
I think that there's a really good point raised by Tony Blair, which is really about the role of liberal interventionism in our society in maintaining global norms. And I think there is a huge role for that still. And I disagree slightly with Alistair on the point that this is about that Biden was elected on this idea of a different kind of international order, a different role for the US. I actually think that he signaled quite early on this idea of a slight retreat around foreign intervention. And I think that is what is popular with the US, who I think, you know, the public in general haven't felt the benefits of that kind of intervention. I do think it's up to the leadership of countries like the US and the UK to make the case for intervention in a smart and well-planned way, because I do think this is going to continue to be really important.
Right. I mean,
Joe, the point I was making there was not that was his message to the world, if you like. I agree that was his message to America. His message to the world was, you know, America's back, we're with you again. And that has been very, very disappointing. Okay. And I do worry that you know, two of the most important pillars of our foreign policy have been strength in Europe and strength with America, and we've weakened both of them.
Right. Sarah, I don't know if you listened to the speech by Tony Blair, but just broadly on that issue, the philosophy and the doctrine of liberal interventionism, do you think that era broadly is over?
Can I say two things? Firstly, I've dealing with about 600 Afghans in Afghanistan, trying to get them back. 11 British nationals I'm currently trying to get back. The government is saying get to the border, but there's no way of doing it. It was unbelievably chaotic, and we do have to keep saying that because it really was, as MPs, desperately trying to get in touch with people across government, looking through our phone book, texting PPSs that we knew, ministers that we knew, desperately trying to get people out. It's a catastrophic failure of foreign policy from this government, and that's really important to stress because it really is. And anybody who says otherwise is not speaking the truth. On foreign policy, I think I didn't see Tony Blair's speech, but the clip I saw was absolutely right. In foreign policy, your starting point is always national interest, keeping your people safe and ensuring that we're economically secure. But beyond that, you do what you can to make the world a better place. Now, government ministers are very keen on doing interviews with pictures of the Queen behind them, and that's great. But the values of the Queen need to be enacted. If you look at the way that she has dealt over many years in the Commonwealth, soft power, influence, improving democracy in many countries, improving standards of living, tackling disease, tackling climate change, using the soft power that the country has to do good in the world. If we are not a country that does that anymore, then that's not a country that I want to see. I think it's incredibly important. Our foreign policy is about our values and doing good in the world where we can.
Well, that statement is, of course, happening this afternoon. Now, over the weekend, 14 days of demonstrations by Extinction Rebellion, the climate group, during which nearly 500 people were arrested, all came to an end. Now, the group says life on Earth is in crisis and facing a mass extinction. We'll show you some pictures here. Protesters outside, very colourful, outside the London Stock Exchange. And we're joined now by Gail Bradbrook from the group. Gail, Extinction Rebellion have said the protests have been incredibly successful. How are you measuring that success?
Well, we had two goals with this rebellion. One was to ask for an immediate demand, which was no new investments in fossil fuels. And we took that demand to the heart of the City of London, because people are fond of saying that the UK has very low emissions, but actually 15% of emissions are funded from the UK. We didn't actually expect that demand to be met because we are not being led out of this crisis. We're being led over a cliff. The Paris Climate Agreement has already failed. We are going to be getting 1.5 degrees of warming and more, which is catastrophic
right.
for millions of people. The second goal, therefore, was to say, why is it that when we're facing and when we're in a time of existential threat, why is it that we're not being led on this issue?
All right. I mean,
because we have a political economy that's unable to lead us in such a crisis.
All right. I mean, there is an indication that the public don't necessarily have a positive view of you, the group. I mean, not you personally. I mean, is there a danger that people start to tune out of the sorts of things you're talking about because of the tactics and the strategy that you adopt?
There's no evidence in that from social movement theory. It's often the case that the people that bring the message are not liked, but as we say, don't shoot the messenger. You know, the point is that 85% of the British public on average now think that we are in an emergency and it's going to affect everyone, and they're quite right. And what we're talking about, you know, you were discussing on this programme earlier about the, not having food on the shelves. We're looking at multi-breadbasket failures in the coming years, according to academics. People ain't seen nothing yet in terms of food shortages, and the trajectory that we're on right now, which is towards 4 degrees of warming, signals the collapse of civilization.
OK, Gail, well, let me, sorry to interrupt, let me open it up. Anita, from a communications point of view, my point about perhaps that people don't actually support Extinction Rebellion as a group because of their tactics and the disruption, but as Gail said, they don't need to be liked, they just need to get the agenda out there, which they're doing.
Yes, well, I saw some YouGov polling suggesting that they were on minus 30% in terms of popularity with the public. And I think even politicians would blanch at that kind of number. So I think there's two different things here. I don't think there are many people resistant to the idea of there needing to do more to tackle climate change. And I certainly think our political leaders, and actually as well as businesses, are seriously engaged in the kind of work that needs to be undertaken to tackle that. I don't think Extinction Rebellion is either drawing attention to some of the nuances of their argument. Gail, this is certainly the first time I've heard of any of those two perspectives, and I've seen Extinction Rebellion everywhere. So I think there's a distinction that needs to be made between the broad issue and whether or not these tactics are doing anything but losing popularity for this organisation.
Right. Sarah, your view, as they say, they don't need to win votes. The strategy works, Kale says.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I spent years before as an MP working in lots of different organisations where we were trying to change minds and trying to effect change, and there are different ways to do it, and protest isn't by any means the only way to do it. You have to start where people are and argue your case from their point of view as well as make the noise, but both of those things are important.
Do you support the sort of protest that Extinction?
Peaceful protest, Extinction Rebellion's cause, absolutely. What I would say is that having talked to, as Shadow Policing Minister, having talked to police on the ground, they're absolutely knackered. There's a lot of resources that they've had to put in place. That's not to say we shouldn't have peaceful protest, but it is to say, you know, they need a bit of support from this government. They don't need a pay freeze, and they need a bit more support in terms of numbers. So, you know, there are lots of issues at play here, but the key argument about the need to push on this government, the need to do more to impact on climate change, to put those values and those targets into action is absolutely the right one.
Yeah, because, Andrew, there are robust targets from the government, but not enough of a narrative for how people are going to have to change their own personal behaviour in order to meet those targets. You haven't been honest about that.
Well, I think we have been honest about it, and I think we'll see more of that over the coming months. But, you know, we shouldn't forget, we're talking right now about Extinction Rebellion and their protests. This was the first country in Europe to legislate for net zero. We have cut our carbon emissions faster than any other country in the G7. We're hosting COP26, and we're ambitious about the agreement that we can get, because ultimately this fight, which we all agree, we need to cut our emissions and do more to fight the climate crisis. This will only be achieved by agreement at a global level. And I have to say, Extinction Rebellion, I think they do damage to the cause. Everybody on this panel agrees. We need to do more. But going about their business, stopping people going about their daily business, is no way to make the case that we need to take action on climate change.
Gail?
So we blocked one intersection in London per day, something like that. There's 11,000 intersections in London. And what's happening is what happens to social movements, right? This is what happened with the suffragettes, propaganda. So you've had a three-pronged approach, really. You've had the police coming down super heavy on us, including violence, use of batons, punching peaceful protesters. It seems like the police's main mission was to stop us getting our message out there. You've got a coordinated attack across the right-wing press to discredit us, and you've got a government trying to pass a police crime and sentencing bill to squash this kind of protest. Like, why is there so much focus on Extinction Rebellion and so little focus on the agenda and action to be actually taken? Because if you look at all these targets that the government set, according to their own committee on climate change, they just keep failing on them. According to the Public Accounts Committee, they have no plan. According to Lord Deben, they haven't seen the delivery plan. There is no plan, folks. We're being led over a cliff. We're already getting 1.5 degrees of warming, and people are going to starve in the future as a result of that.
All right.
And
Gail, I'm going to have to stop you because we're getting close to the end of the programme, but thank you very much for coming on. Alistair, I just want to get a response from you on the sort of political side in terms of the strategy and tactics of Extinction Rebellion. The issue is obviously up the political agenda, but in the US, they've worked very hard to attach themselves, environmentalists, to the Democrats, and to some extent it's worked with Joe Biden. Would that be better to try and attach themselves, XR, to a political party here?
No, from their perspective, I don't think it would. And you know, I agree with Gail. I find it really alarming that the government's bringing forward this legislation aimed at sort of curbing peaceful protest. And look, they may be unpopular. Although I've got to say, Anita, Gavin Williamson would give his right arm for -30. He's way worse than that, and he's still in charge of schools.
Right. Well, so reshuffle's happening perhaps later in the week.
But I do think they have played a role in getting the issue up the agenda, and Gail is right that this really is an emergency for the planet, and I suspect that the protest movement, for all their unpopularity, can actually, you know, pat themselves on the back to some extent for having made that happen.
Right, Andrew?
I disagree. I think they're doing great damage to their cause, and this government is taking some of the most stringent action of any government in the world in terms of combating the climate emergency, and will continue to do so. And we hope we'll get a good agreement at COP26. We take the rest of the world with us. Coming up in a couple of months. Thank you to all of you for being on the first show back, in the first term back for the autumn. That's all we have time for, though. I'll be back tomorrow at 12:15. From all of us here, bye-bye.